Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and in today's episode I'm going to talk about pre and post exercise nutrition. So this one, thanks Fiona for sending through an email, a very nice email in regards to this question and just sort of a discussion on this topic, which I think is a really cool topic. So lots of interesting information on sort of pre and post nutrition. What I sort of will preface this episode with is that generally very detailed or precise nutrition advice, such as pre and post exercise nutrition, is out of scope for a personal trainer to give like very specific, like you should have this meal this time before training and this meal this time after training. Generally can't give exact, I guess, meal plans. Again, throughout this discussion, though, I think you'll sort of realize there's a lot of general information that PTs can. I've done sort of some nutrition podcasts in the past and sort of discuss nutrition, and there's lots of good information as personal trainers we can give clients. So some of this information, depending on how you use it, is a little bit out of scope. It's always good to educate yourself, I think. Sort of Fiona alluded to in an email, there's lots of good research out there and some interesting things, interesting topics to look at in terms of pre and post exercise nutrition. It's probably not something you need to really dive into depth and give really specific advice to general population and your clients about. A lot of the research relates to athlete performance and things like that, which isn't really necessary. But as we go through some of the recommendations that are sort of in the literature, you'll find that all the general advice we can give them in regards to the sort of the 5 food groups and sort of kilojoule balance, energy in, energy out, and fueling for their day and their exercise, we can give them really good advice that will help them with their nutrition and get what they need without the need for all these different specific things that are sort of studied in the literature. Again, super interesting that I love reading about, so it's really cool topic that Fiona emailed through. But yeah, just keep in mind it's probably something you don't need to understand, or not understand, but don't need to give really specific advice about this in order for clients to get results. If we give them general nutrition advice, they should see they'll see some good examples. But it's also good to know, because you can realize that, hey, there are some good general guidelines you can give that will help clients. But with that all said, we'll get into some discussion on pre and post exercise nutrition. And I think it is a cool topic. I think the more you look into it, though, the more you can sort of see that it's very nuanced, and in reality, we might talk about protein to start with, and then we'll have a bit of a look at carbohydrates, because that's where the main literature is around protein and carbohydrates, sort of what I'll discuss today. And there's a lot of stuff around carbohydrate timing, protein timing, all that sort of stuff. But in general, so we'll talk about protein first. Like, there was a big thing about like this anabolic window of protein intake probably a few years ago, where you had to get 30 grams of protein in within 30 minutes of your training session to maximize muscle protein synthesis post-workout, and that sort of, the later research has shown sort of it's not really, there's no 30-minute window. If there is a window, it's quite a little bit longer, whether it's 1 to 2 hours potentially out to that sort of length. But what it also sort of shows, and I'll put a couple of links in the description below, so you can have a look at one of the research articles I sort of read in regards to the protein intake, and I'll put one in there for the carbohydrates stuff as well. But what I sort of, when it comes down to pre and post workout, a lot of the we'll talk a lot about post workout, because a lot of it is about recovery and maximizing recovery. I guess we'll talk about potentially where it fits in pre, but a lot of it will sort of fit in post. And I guess in regards to the protein, so that 30-minute window isn't really, it's not really necessary. So, and again, this is where I like to relate it back to the guidelines of eating the right amount of the 5 food groups, enough servings of lean meats, all that sort of stuff. If you educate a client on that, that can help them get their protein. If they're eating enough serves of lean meat throughout the day, with good whole food groups, they should hit their protein intake. So for example, general recommendations is around, like, for a client, let's say trying to maintain or let's say build muscle mass, is generally 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So for an 80 kilogram person, that 2 times body weight would be 160 grams. So generally, as long as they're getting up to or around 160 grams of protein per day, that's going to be maximizing their protein requirements to build muscle. Potentially up to 2.2, depending on what literature you read and what guidelines you're going off. But 2.2 is potentially more for individuals who are looking to maintain their muscle mass while potentially looking to lose fat mass. If we're in a kilojoule surplus, we generally don't really need to go over 2 grams per kilogram. But that sort of guide is within 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram per day. So 1.4 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So 2 grams will be 160 for an 80 kilo person. 1.4 times 80 is 112. So if you get between 112 grams of protein and 160 grams of protein per day for an 80 kilo person, you're going to have enough protein in your system to maximize muscle gain, I guess. If you're resistance training, and that you obviously need to resistance train to help stimulate muscle growth. But that amount of protein is good. So from there, it's more about educating your clients about, well, what food has protein? Where do I get my protein? How do I read food labels to know how much protein I'm getting in what I'm eating? So there's a whole lot that goes into it. That's why I think you have to educate clients on the basics before they even think about this. And you'll find that if they do understand the basics, this sort of pre and post nutrition takes care of itself a little bit. So generally, let's say I need 120 grams of protein per day, if I split that up over 3 meals, that's 40, 80, 120. So that's 3 meals of 40 grams of protein per day. So if I need some protein for my breakfast, I need some protein in lunch, and I need some protein in my dinner. That'll get me that amount of protein I need. And if I need a little bit extra, I want to get 160 or a little bit more, potentially getting an extra meal in, get it into my snacks, that sort of thing. And again, as personal trainers, we shouldn't recommend supplements, so we'd be recommending whole foods. Again, if a client obviously takes a protein shake, we can't tell them, we don't need to say don't do that. But we recommend getting sources through whole foods, because that's going to have lots of vitamins and minerals that are also going to help them function and their body function well. So whole foods is definitely pushing them towards eating healthy whole foods regularly throughout the day. And what they sort of find is if you have those sort of 3 to 4 servings of protein throughout the day and you hit that recommended daily intake, that will maximize muscle protein synthesis. So with that window, if I'm training in the morning or at night or whatever I'm doing, as long as you're getting a protein feeding in within 1 to 2 hours, you're going to get that muscle like that increase in muscle protein synthesis that you're after. So, and a majority of the time, if you're eating regularly and consistently, that's either going to be your breakfast, or you're going to train, then you're going to have lunch, or you're going to be training and then you have dinner. Or you just have dinner and you train, and that protein is in your system still. So even if you're having it just before or 2 hours after, getting that protein is more important than making sure I get my 30 grams of protein in straight after my workout. If I do a training session and scull a protein shake, because I want to make sure I maximize the muscle protein synthesis, but then I haven't even reached 112 or 120 grams of protein in my daily intake, that post-exercise nutrition really means quite minimal. Unless I'm structured in my whole day and meeting the overall intake, then there's no point worrying about the post-exercise nutrition. So your first thought needs to be making sure they're getting whole foods in, and generally throughout the day eating consistently well-structured day to day. And you'll find then they are getting protein in the right times, because if they're eating 3 to 4 meals a day, they're going to be getting 40 grams of protein around their workout in some form based on the meals or their protein timing anyway. So in terms of protein, that's sort of where it's at, where as long as they get it consistently, I'm not too fussed when they get it. And most of the research sort of leans that way in terms of as long as they're getting their protein in, or their roughly 1.4 or to 2 times kilograms per kilogram of body weight, that's going to give them protein they need. So if they space that evenly throughout the day, over 3 to 4 meals, that's the most important thing for protein, rather than worrying about trying to get it in post-workout. When we look at carbohydrates are another interesting one, another big macronutrient. I'll also put the link in the description to my previous podcast on tracking your macros and if you should track your macronutrients, another interesting one. But carbohydrates are obviously another important fuel source that generally fuel out activity. We'll start with pre exercise nutrition for this one, I think. So again, when it comes to pre-exercise nutrition, it's not something I generally talk to clients too much about. They'll generally have their own information, their own thoughts. Whatever makes them feel good or have energy is important. If they're coming in super lethargic, it's a good to sessions. It's a good way to start a discussion. Well, how's your overall nutrition? What's your diet like? When did you last eat? What did you have for breakfast? All sorts of stuff. How much are you eating per day? Most of the time you'll find, depending on how they feel, it's probably more in relation to how many kilojoules they're eating each day, and are they getting that in consistently. So obviously the recommended daily intake will change depending on male, female, how big they are, how much muscle mass, how active their job is, how much they train. All these different things will affect how many kilojoules they burn throughout the day. But if they're always coming in sort of lethargic, good way to start the conversation about, well, overall, what's their day-to-day kilojoule intake look like? Is it actually really low? How much are they intaking? Most clients won't even know. So that's where I think the education needs to start on. Okay, so let's take a food diary, or I want you to write down everything you eat for the next week. And then you can start to educate them on, well, this is how much is in this. If I tell you all this is your total kilojoules. And as personal trainers on the Eat for Health website, there's a calculator that lets them know how much they should be eating. So we can sort of assist them to use this information to learn about nutrition and learn about how much they should be eating, where they're getting their kilojoules, all that sort of stuff. So there's definitely a lot of scope for us to give information to clients rather than just a specific pre-nutrition and post-nutrition, because even if we say this is the perfect pre-workout meal, if they're not doing anything else right, it's still not going to change anything. So we really need to make sure it's feeling good, or they're fueling themselves well throughout the day, which comes down to the general guidelines. But the amount of carbohydrates they're going to need for the day depends on sort of the level of activity. So if they're not doing, and these are just general guidelines, I'll put the link below. Again, probably things that are a little bit outside of scope to educate clients on, because we want them focusing just on general meals, not specific macronutrients usually. But this is how carbohydrates change. Like for a low intensity or someone who doesn't do a lot of moving, 3 to 5 grams per kilogram per day. Moderate exercise, so it's around 1 hour a day, 5 to 7 grams per kilogram per day. And then if it's sort of a moderate to high exercise for 1 to 3 hours during the day, it's sort of 6 to 10 grams. And then lots of exercise, high intensity exercise, sort of 4 to 5 hours, so sort of elite athlete, endurance running, maybe 8 to 12 grams per day, per kilogram per day. Again, wide guidelines there, and it's going to be different depending on day to day, how much you learn. So generally for weight loss clients and muscle gain clients, most of the time you're just managing overall kilojoule intake. You don't worry about how much carbs per day to fuel exercise. Like overall, you need to be in a slight kilojoule surplus or a slight kilojoule deficit, and that's going to get you the results you need. Trying to worry about, do I get enough carbohydrates to fuel myself? Not generally something I think you want to have clients stressing about. In terms of pre-exercise nutrition, I don't give generally pre-exercise nutrition. I couldn't find I didn't look for long, but there's not a lot in pre-exercise nutrition in terms of most of it's in maximizing performance, and for generally things shorter than an hour, which most training sessions will only last up to 60, maybe 90 minutes. Generally things, and a lot of the carbohydrate research is based on endurance training, not resistance training. But generally, think for anything like less than 90 minutes, like around 60 minutes, additional carbohydrate feeding is not really necessary. We've got the muscle glycogen stores to perform, especially endurance training or cardiovascular training, for that length of time without the additional stores needed. So, in terms of preparing for like resistance training or a 60-minute, less than 60-minute run, generally, as long as you sort of have eaten well generally throughout the day, it's about maximizing how you feel. So maybe don't eat a heavy meal if it's going to sort of impact your digestion and how your stomach feels if you go for a run, or training on a full stomach doesn't feel good, or if you haven't eaten for a couple of hours, maybe your blood sugar is a little bit low. So having a banana or something can help just lift your energy levels a little bit. There's a lot of research on mouthwash and carbohydrates and performance and things like that too. So generally, anything to give you a little bit of energy to maximize your performance is going to be fine. And that's sort of, if a client's asking about, well, what should I eat before training, it's really, it would sort of take into account, you don't want them to eat a whole lot of carbohydrates if that doesn't make them feel good, or if their whole day is sort of, if they haven't had any breakfast, it doesn't matter what they eat, they're going to be low in kilojoules for the day. So it's very hard to give a specific recommendation, I think, which is why it's important to just have general discussions with them about why they might feel lethargic or what's going to get them feeling better. Maybe it's lack of sleep. Also can affect how they feel before training. And I have done a sort of a podcast on pre-workout and caffeine and how that can affect energy levels. So generally, it's trying to just maximize training. You don't need to think too much about pre-training carbohydrates or proteins or things. That should take care of itself in a well-balanced diet. And again, some of this next stuff relates a little bit to more athletes or sporting goals, and it's sort of in regards to the refueling post-exercise, and more the cardiovascular training, runs and rides and things like that. It's sort of about refueling and getting that glycogen back into our muscle stores and refueling our muscle stores. Generally, it's only important if we've got to perform again within 24 hours. If we've got a sort of an event, let's maybe say tennis is probably a good example, and I might be playing a match one day and then I've got to perform again the next day and I'm in a tennis tournament. Getting carbohydrates in immediately post my first match is important to kickstart that process of getting my muscle glycogen stores back up. So immediately getting some carbohydrates in after that sporting performance is important. If I have over 24 hours to recover before I perform again, then I don't necessarily need to worry about getting the carbohydrates in immediately. I'll restore those carbohydrates over that period of time just from my usual feeding practices. So you don't need to, I can just get meals in when I feel like it. So sometimes after a big match or something like that, athletes may not feel like eating, but it's important they actually get that food in to help recovery, even if they don't feel like necessarily eating a lot of carbohydrates. But if they don't have to perform immediately, it's okay. They can just take their time when they feel like eating, get those recommended intakes in, like the 5 to 7 grams per kilogram per day, in over the next sort of 24 to 48 hours. And over that period of time, they'll replenish those stores to their maximum level. So it's not of an issue. So that post-workout carbohydrate intake is generally only super important when an athlete has an event coming up within the sort of the next 8 to 12 hours, potentially within the next 24. Anything longer than that, the glycogen stores will replenish with any time frame of carbohydrate intake just over their normal time course. So yeah, it's pre and post nutrition is super interesting. It can come down to the exact individual or circumstance. It could come down, and some individuals will respond better to carbohydrate intake during performance as opposed to others. So some people may have gut issues or digestion issues, or just they're sensitive to ingesting carbohydrates pre-race, post-race, or even during the race for the longer sort of triathlons, 2-hour events, marathons, these sort of things. So it's a very individual thing, this pre and post nutrition. whether it's important or not. Some high-level athletes, it may change performance 2 to 3%. It's not the be-all and end-all. The majority of it is going to be, are they getting the kilojoules in consistently? Are they getting the protein in consistently day to day over consistent days, weeks, and months? And that's going to help fuel their exercise and help them adapt to their training goals. This one pre-meal, one post-meal time frames is only the very tip of the iceberg that maybe makes a 2 to 3% difference. So in terms of the general population and clients, it's very hard to apply, and it's probably unnecessary to apply based on they don't have to peak their performance usually, and they're recovering over a longer period of time, and they can still perform. It's not going to be a major impact on their performance, especially if it's just a single gym session or it's just a single running session. If they've got their well-balanced nutrition and they know they're eating their 5 food groups and meeting their kilojoule intake for the day, then they're going to have the fuel they need to perform well and exercise well to see results. So pre and post nutrition is an interesting topic that I think relates really well to some athlete circumstances at the higher level. But in terms of day to day, you're going to be able to get great results without stressing about preparing meals or what am I having pre-training, what am I having post-training. Eat good food, good whole food, and understand how much you should be eating, how much you are eating, and manage that over consistently. And then, if you have little events, it's something to discuss with a dietitian or a nutritionist or a sports dietitian. They'll have some good recommendations to your individual circumstance, because as I said, it's going to be related to an individual circumstance. It's not one recommendation for every single person should do this pre-training or pre-event, and everyone needs to do this pre or post-event or post-training. It's completely dependent on the individual's circumstances, how long the event is, what the event is, all that sort of stuff. So if someone's looking to get that into it, definitely recommend getting some assistance from a dietitian or nutritionist, because not only do you have to take into account what your advice you're giving them pre and post, but also that advice will depend on what they're doing for the rest of the day and rest of the evening. How's their nutrition look week in, week out, and how do we manage that? So really cool topic. Hope you got something out of that discussion, guys. Again, a lot of sort of information in there and ideas, but I think it's a cool concept. I'll put some links in the description. You can have a bit of a read yourself. But as I said, it's good not to overcomplicate nutrition for the general population, I think. But yeah, a great little topic there, Fiona, that you can sort of read for hours. But yeah, interesting things that have been studied in terms of generally athlete performance for that pre and post nutrition. But in terms of general training, I think if you can maximize sort of your whole food intake, meet those protein and kilojoule requirements, and then you just generally you should have energy or things like that for your training. If you want more advice, have a think about it, have a read, or educate your client on proper sleep or regular meals throughout the day. Don't skip breakfast. All that sort of stuff is general advice we can definitely give to help assist our clients. Anyway, guys, I hope you got a little bit out of that, about my thoughts on sort of pre and post nutrition and nutrition in general. If you do have any thoughts on this, definitely please send me an email at tom@afa.com.au. Happy to have a chat. If you've got any topics or just things you'd like me to discuss or get my thoughts on, shoot me an email as well. Always happy to follow that up. But yeah, other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.